What have you focused on when it comes to studying populism?
Yes, I'm originally a Latin Americanist, and so I have focused on populism in Latin America, and especially Venezuela is one of my countries of expertise. But I've more recently been looking globally at different cases, and I'm particularly interested and concerned about the polarizing aspects of populism and the polarizing strategies of populist leaders. So I've been looking at that with a group of scholars in a very collaborative research effort, looking at both the macro level, so within countries, nationally, what are the political dynamics of this between political leaders and oppositions who are employing kind of polarizing populist strategies. And then at the individual level, at the citizen level, what are the emotions involved? What are the feelings and the attitudes toward democracy that this brings about at the citizen level?
How can populism polarize societies?
You know, populism is not always bad. It can have good elements, but I'm particularly looking at the potential negative consequences. And one of those does come from the very polarizing nature of a populist message, because a populist message is distinguishing between us and them, generally focusing on the people as the good group that a political actor wants to say, let's do something for you, the good people. And usually there is blame thrown onto an elite or an establishment, the establishment political parties, or it might be an economic elite. It could be a foreign elite. It could be the European Union or some other foreign elite. So this us versus them is a divisive strategy, and it's creating in the minds of people that there may be a threat from the them, those who are the out group, however they are defined. And that kind of threat then makes people, not want to work together, not want to live together, not want to communicate. So it breaks down our ability and willingness to compromise, which we have to do in politics, and to look for solutions together. And it might break down our willingness to respect the rights of political minority groups. And finally, it might actually lead us to support violations of democratic principles, because if we're threatened by some other group who might come to power, we might want to do everything possible to keep them out of power. Or if we're threatened by the group that's currently in power, we might want to resort to even undemocratic means of removing them from power. So those are some of the negative consequences that I'm looking at.
Can you go a little bit deeper in trying to explain the consequences and basically what does that tell about democracies?
There's another aspect of it in populism, because there's such a focus on the people, and usually a populist leader or a populist party will say they have an electoral mandate. And so, you know, the people elected us, we have a majority, and therefore we should be able to do whatever the people want. And that means that often they might downgrade other institutions like courts, or even, you know, a legislature, or accountability mechanisms to say we're following the will of the people. And what we see in a pattern looking around the world is that they often try to enhance their normal majority and give themselves a disproportionate advantage in elections to reach a two-thirds majority, which then gives them in most countries, most democracies, the ability to change the Constitution. Then they can further change electoral rules, and the goal is to entrench their advantage, to stay in power through elections. And they can then make other changes to institutions legally, democratically, because they have a two-thirds majority. One nature of populism is also to say we are the true representatives of the people. So if you have this logic, the flip side of that is, if we're the true representative, we can't lose an election. And if the message is the only way we can lose an election is through fraud, then that can also have negative consequences for democracy, because it's delegitimizing the electoral process if they lose, or the ability the legitimacy of anyone else with even the capability. So it's these two logics of the polarizing us versus them and the threat and the distrust that it creates in the other political camp, and the electoral logic saying there's no way we can lose because we're the true representatives of the people. Both of those together create this anti-democratic and anti-liberal democracy outcome.
How can stakeholders, be them like civil society, institutions, perhaps mitigate or react to these challenges that you just mentioned, that a populism basically raises?
I think the first thing is to absolutely to be aware and to hear those kinds of divisive messages that might be even manipulative, and to be able to resist it. And so if you hear a political candidate or a leader making denigrating, insulting comments about another group in a way that's attempting to divide you, to resist that and to examine it. So I think that's the first thing, to be alert to these kinds of tactics. Another thing is for particularly those who are trying to compete with a populist, is to say, well, why is this populist being successful? What did we do wrong? And to think maybe we didn't really listen to the needs of the people. Maybe we weren't responsive, and let's examine that. So I think that's the second thing, is for the competition to examine their own actions and perhaps needs for improvement. And then the third thing is for both sides, but particularly those who are trying to compete, to not reciprocate the polarizing tactics that are the discrediting of the other side, the denigration of the other side, or the discrediting of the system, and instead to try to mobilize and to win in a way that is still democratic, that's presenting a more positive message. What is my alternative I'm offering? Not just, we have to take down this really bad populist political leader, but to say, what am I going to offer? Because it's not enough to point out the evils of some leader if you've got nothing better to offer that will generate trust. And I think that the key thing is there are several things that for people to listen to. For example, if they hear leaders and they hear their own neighbors talking with the language of we and they, or us and them, without identifying them, without naming the other people, that's a deliberate tactic to depersonalize and to dehumanize the other side. And that's an old psychological warfare tactic. And people, if they're aware of things like that and start hearing themselves saying we and them, that's a warning sign that we should start listening to.